All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Welcome to the program. Jason Ott here, along with RJ Carter from Critical Blast, who's now starting to pixelate a little bit. He said he had a strong
And I didn't have anything to drink, and I'm already
and
pixelating.
our guest this evening, he has been on our channel a few times before, and he joins us again tonight. A multiple award winning author, globetrotter, world traveler, world creator, Alan Dean Foster is our guest. Welcome back, sir. How you been?
I've been pretty good.
Well, that's good. You look happy and healthy and hearty and whole. So I guess that's all anybody could ask for these days, right?
I'll settle for the whole at this point. I mean,
So last time, let me start real quick here. Last time you were on the program with Mary Robinette Kowal, and we were talking about the dust up with the Walt Disney Company. And I'm given to understand that there's been resolution on that. So is that done and over with, and everybody's satisfied now?
well, I don't know about everybody because what happened was, as you probably know, there were a lot of other people besides me who it turned out were kind of a similar situation, and everything kind of came to the forefront all at once SIFWA got involved and I got involved, and so a lot of other people got money that was owed to them. Not a lot of money most of the time, but it's all for real. It's all money that was owed. So to answer your question, yes, it's all been resolved. Was resolved months ago. The sad thing about it is that it all could have been resolved with a quick phone call from somebody in a position to do something about it,
Yeah.
and that's not the way it worked out. But it did work out. So I'm happy. I presume all or most of the other people who got involved are happy, and it's well over and done with and behind us, and that's a good thing. I'd like people to understand that I love Disney animation. I've been an animation buff since probably I was 4 years old. My problem was never with Disney Creative. The problem was always with Disney Accounting, which is an alternate universe like most Hollywood accounting is. And once we got things positioned, everything resolved itself. And like I said, it's all over and done with, and presumably everybody else is happy with the resolution too.
So where are you now in terms of projects? What are you working on? Let's start there, because we haven't, we can talk about all of the things that you've done, and that's a long list. I mean, we could probably talk for about 3 hours about stuff that you have written. What are you writing?
I just finished a novelette called Dead Man's Tale, which my agent has, and which has nothing to do with pirates. I don't think I'm going to give anything away by saying that. I just recently finished a piece of what's called script doctoring, which is something I've done a little bit in the past. Script doctoring is when they hire somebody to go over a script, but there's no credits involved, and you really don't get any notice for it. It's a time-honored profession in the motion picture business. Carrie Fisher was particularly noted for it, for example.
Yes.
And I can't mention the film because there's no film yet, so there's no point in mentioning it. But it was an interesting piece of work. It's science fiction. I have a book coming out sometime this year called The Mocking Program, which was an interesting project because what I ended up doing was writing a novella. It's Lovecraftian, on which a video game was based. It was done by a company called Bayuk in France. And I don't know how many people here saw the game, but it was interesting for me because once the novella had been accepted, I was then asked to write alternative sequences for the game. In other words, you choose this, something happens, you choose that, something else happens. But the novella that's coming out in book form later this year is the original novella, which is a story I'm very proud of, actually. I hadn't written anything Lovecraftian in a long time, and it's by far the longest Lovecraftian piece that I've written. And all your favorite old friends are in there. I won't mention who, but you can probably guess. So there's that. And then another project. There's a book coming out I can't give a date, but the book is finished, called Stewart. Stewart is the first time I've ever done a novelization of an unproduced screenplay.
Oh,
It's contemporary fantasy. Yeah, contemporary fantasy. And I was asked to do it by the authors of the original screenplay. At which point I explained to them that this is not usually the way it's done. What you do is you produce the movie, and then publishers bid or don't bid for the rights to have a novelization done, and they hire somebody to write the book. But the people who did the screenplay believe in the project so much that they took a chunk of their own money and paid me to do a novelization of it before the film is done. So Stewart it's a contemporary fantasy, like I said, and it's a dog story, basically. And I'm not going to tell you any more about it because I'm not in a position to give anything away. But the book should be out later this year. And some of the people who've been involved in the back end of it, promoting it and such, will surprise you. It's well outside the traditional science fiction fantasy field. And there are a lot of people who are interested in it because there are a lot of people who love dogs.
Sure.
They might not particularly like fantasy, they might not particularly like science fiction, but they love dogs. And it is a dog story, but it is a fantasy. So it was, and it's not a kid's story. It's not a, not a juvenile story. So it was very interesting, something for me to take on. And the fact that it was something a little different was the main reason that I agreed to do it. I have several other books that are finished that are just looking for a publisher. One is called Secretions, which is a Commonwealth novel, a standalone Commonwealth novel. Another one called Lost on Paradise, which is standalone but not Commonwealth, science fiction, and one called Hinder the Bear, which is fantasy, fairly traditional fantasy. And what I did for that was, if somebody goes to my Facebook fan page, they'll see a bunch of illustrations of characters in the story that I did using DALL-E, which is part of the Chat GPT people.
Sure.
I just thought that would be fun. What was really fun was, after I'd done the characters as best I could, and this is this is the first version of DALL-E that I did this with, so it's not nearly as refined as it could be. Went back to the manuscript and made sure that the descriptions of the character in the manuscript accorded with the illustrations I've done. So anybody who looks at the illustrations will actually get a really good idea what the characters in the book look like. I don't expect anything else to happen with the illustrations because, unfortunately, nobody does illustrated books much anymore unless they're children's books. Also, there you go. Something I always wanted to do, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but when the pandemic hit, I found myself with a lot more time than usual at home, even more than usual. And something I'd always wanted to do was write music for orchestra. So I started learning music, and I'm working on my 7th symphony, halfway through that. And I've done a bunch of other pieces, none of which have been performed. I think because I don't move in musical circles, and maybe it's not good enough, and don't know where to go with it. But there are some people, including a couple of composers, who've listened to some of the pieces I've done, one in Vienna, and they like it. So I think I can tell well enough if they're saying they like it because they actually like it, or they're just being polite. So I feel very good about it, and undoubtedly after I'm dead, it'll get played all the time, and I'll be the musical science fiction version of Philip K. Dick, who becomes rich and famous after he dies.
right.
Well, when Vienna likes your music, that's a little bit like Cannes liking your film.
Well, it's just one guy, but still.
Hey, he's in Vienna. That counts.
That's right.
Alan, I gotta say, I pulled Jason in on this as a huge Hail Mary, because my friend Brent said, "Hey, you ever wanted to interview Alan Dean Foster?" I'm like, I know that name. Of course I want to interview this man. And after we set it up, I'm like, and I know absolutely nothing about him now. And I say now because back in the Star Wars heyday, when I read Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which was, I was all gung ho for Star Wars. I literally thought that was the next movie. I thought I was ahead of the curve on this. And I was like, this is a really cool Star Wars story. I can't wait to see it. And, unfortunately, there just aren't enough extended universe stories out there for them to film, or so I'm told. Have, when that statement came out, there's not enough material out there to make films of. How did you get the ceiling repaired after you hit it?
I'm not sure where to go with that, but
we're among friends here, Alan. I mean, you can feel free to say, well, as long as it doesn't get you in any trouble with any kind of NDA or an agreement or anything you had to sign for them to pay.
I'm at the point to where A, I don't care what anybody says, and B, I've been around long enough to have a pretty good idea what to say and what not to say. If what you're asking me is, was I disappointed when it didn't become the second film? Is that what you're asking?
Not necessarily the second film, but when they did finally go on to do sequels, and the statement came out that, well, there's not any material for us to pull from, and
Kathleen, when Kathleen Kennedy basically said, we basically gotta start with a clean slate, all because we didn't have any material. I mean, I could see her reasoning behind that, because I mean, you got 30 years of the extended universe. Where do you start pulling to adapt things without having to recast your entire stable of characters? So a lot of people blew up about that I thought maybe a little unnecessarily. But
but to throw out years and years of canon, which was accepted as canon. It was Lucasfilm Publishing. You had the Jedi twins. They're like, okay, we're doing sequels. Han and Leia are here. We're going to see the Jedi twins. We didn't get Bupkis that had anything to do with the EU.
My basic take on that is pretty straightforward and pretty Hollywood. Is studios like to control everything, as you well know. And if they use somebody else's property, somebody else's writing, they have to pay them. So they would much rather invent something brand new, regardless of whether it's from a fan standpoint, and I'm as much a fan as anybody, better or worse, they want something they can completely control. And that means creating original material that has nothing to do with anything that's gone before, that they can control completely. Every ancillary right, everything. Now, whether that's better from a fan standpoint or not, I would, of course, being a fan, disagree with that. It would have been wonderful to see so many different things done from material that had already been written, not necessarily mine, but other writers, and well accepted. And they are kind of, at this point, at least in the TV versions of Star Wars, trending in that direction. Because somebody, I think, has decided that, hey, enough time has passed, and maybe we have to pay royalties on this or we don't. But this is a really good story, or really good characters, and maybe we can incorporate this into The Mandalorian, the Ashoka timeline, or there's just so much stuff out there. I don't think they have to do that, but I think it's the smart way to go.
Well,
as far as the films go, I think we're pretty much done with the whole Skywalker. Look, nobody asked me this stuff. If they had asked me,
that's why we're doing it now.
No. If they had asked me, I would have gone. Remember what I said before when you asked, prepped me for the question. I would have said one thing. George obviously would have said something else, but I don't own any rights to anything, and George doesn't own, presume, any rights to anything, and Mark doesn't own any rights to anything. It's all owned by the corporation, and the corporation will do what the corporation wants to do. Whether it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, it's not for me to say. It's not up to me. I vented my spleen completely with regards to episode 8.
Yeah. A lot of people did. Well, and to your point about the rights, that reminds me, because Star Trek Voyager ran into that. When they cast Robert Duncan McNeil, the original plan, as I understand it, they were going to bring back the character of Nick Locarno, whom Robert Duncan McNeil had played in an episode. And instead, they created this new character, Tom Paris, who is basically Nick Locarno with a different name because they didn't want to pay the rights to use the character Nick Locarno. I want to say it was Hilary Bader that wrote that episode, but I don't think that's right. It might have been Snodgrass. I can't remember, but somebody had written that episode, and they didn't want to pay in perpetuity for the rights to this character. So they created a new character out of whole cloth. And I can understand, if you have all of this material, you got to pay somebody for it. And I imagine now that you've got, Grand Admiral Thrawn in there, and you've got a couple of other different characters that have shown up from the EU, that they probably would have to have everything mapped out as far as, making sure that everybody gets paid, especially in the wake of what happened with you and everybody else with tie-in and licensing and all that other stuff, making sure that everybody got paid there.
Not necessarily. Depends entirely on how the contracts are structured.
Yeah.
Just because it was in the EU doesn't mean that anybody who created anything for the EU gets paid a nickel.
Yeah,
Depends
that's what
on
I was
what
thinking.
the contract says. My contracts said I get paid for this, and we weren't getting paid for that, which was subsequent sales of the books. And so I had kind of an ironclad piece of paper to back me up. Somebody later on in the EU, and I'm not going to mention any names or any properties,
Sure.
might say in their contract, you have no rights to these characters if they're used in film whatsoever. All rights are retained by Lucasfilm/Disney at this point, and that's it. It would be the right thing to do if, shall we say, since you mentioned it, Thrawn is used for a person to get for that. If the contract specifies that, I'll give you a better example,
Okay.
one that I'm a little more familiar with. When I was doing the Star Trek logs, the last one that I did, because I try to save the best stories for the last, was a story based on Larry Niven's The Slaver Weapon. Now, The Slaver Weapon had been published as a short story. And I never talked to Larry about this. I felt very awkward doing it. But my presumption was that when Larry agreed to have his story done as one of the Star Trek animated episodes, he'd read the contract, or his agent had read the contract that was involved, that said they had the right to, for example, somewhere down in the fine print, have somebody do a book version of the story. And I doubt that Larry, again, never talked to him about it, I doubt that Larry got $1 for the book rights, because he probably gave those away in the contract when he signed the contract to have it done as an animated episode. If you do that, you have no rights as an author. That's why you have good agent, good lawyers. That's their job. That's why they get paid, is to look for stuff like that. And I know that my agency, which I've had for half a century, the Virginia Kid Agency, they go over everything with a fine-tooth comb. And I remember back before the days of electronic contracts and stuff, I'd get a copy of the contract that would have this clause marked out, this clause would be modified, and we're just dealing with publishers now. And if the publishers didn't agree with that, we didn't sign the contract.
Yeah.
They almost always did, but a lot of the time, stuff like that is thrown into contracts just to see what people can get away with. Because not everybody has a good agent, not everybody has an agent.
Well, and nowadays you have more resources, things like Writer Beware, for example, where you have a number of different people that are compiling information about agencies, about publishers, about vanity press, and the various different things. And say, okay, here's some best practices. Here's some stuff to watch out for. This guy, stay clear of this guy because of this and this and this and that. And as that has grown and more information has dropped in on that, I think there are more ways for new writers to educate themselves on the process. And nowadays writers are carrying the bigger part of the load in terms of marketing and promotion, and all of the other things. And why not just throw another hat on there as the legal thing, and be able to review contracts?
Well, there's no question that the internet has made a huge help as far as that goes, and made it a lot easier for beginning writers, particularly, to find out what they should and shouldn't do as far as signing contracts. I didn't have that when I got started, but I had a wonderful agency, so I never had to worry about it. But you need to be careful. You sell your first book, let's say, and there's a contract, and you're so excited. Maybe you're 25, 23 years old. So excited, you have a tendency not to read the fine print. And what you'll find out, if you read the fine print, is that generally, if you just sign the contract as it is handed to you, is that you've signed away all rights to the story throughout the universe forever. And if you hit it big and it's a bestseller and it's made into a major motion picture, you may not get what you deserve. So you have to be careful. You have to be careful.
By the way, they're on my shelf there, all 8 of them, just so I can show off a little bit. So
all 8 of them. There's 10.
Well, there's 8 of the animated ones, and there's 12 of the live action series adaptations. Are there 10? Am I missing 2?
There are 10.
I'm embarrassed.
But you have 8, and it looks like they're all first printings. So,
well, then I now have a mission.
there are 10.
I now have a mission.
And the
Let's hit
last
that
2
Once Upon a Time story again.
based on what I felt best story, which was Slaver Weapon, and if I remember correctly, More Tribbles by Dave Gerald.
I can't believe
But
I've gone all of this time thinking that I had all of them. And yes, Mrs. Boss now has a mission. Yes. So
Come on back down to Bentonville, Jason. We'll hit up Once Upon a Time bookstore one more time. And
right. Okay. But I'm gonna have to look and find first editions then, because they got to match.
Well, the covers don't match. They changed them with number 9, so don't feel bad about that. There are a lot of copies out there. I mean, the series surprised everybody. It's been through, I don't know, 40 printings or 50 printings. It's crazy. I still get royalties on them every 6 months.
They were great stories, though. I mean, I had the honor of interviewing Lou Scheimer about a year before he died, and he talked about getting the Emmy Award for that. He was a little disappointed because he thought that Fat Albert and Cosby Kid should have been the one that got the Emmy. He had more confidence in that, but one of the things that he said they could do in working with all the Star Trek folk was that they weren't bound by any budget. So all of a sudden your alien crew was a lot more alien that you couldn't do in the television series.
And I love that. Particularly MRS. If you have a thing for cats and you've got a feline character, you just want to write about that character. I expanded as much as I could. Now, if you want to look for something difficult, there was an outfit called Aeolian Press, which did the books in hardcover.
Oh.
And it was kind of an illegal deal. As far as I remember it, they never paid the publisher for the rights. Valentine never got anything for that. And it was kind of an off-the-wall, illegal, semi-mafia publishing enterprise. But the books look really nice if you can find them. So there are hardcovers of those books, but they can be tough to find. And nobody gets any royalties from them at all, but they look nice on the bookshelf.
I may have to. I'll have to make a note here. Star Trek.
You have 2 missions now, Jason.
Now I have 2 missions on top of everything else that I've got to do. Right. Anyway, I do have this one note in the chat from Mike Walters for you, RJ, saying that you appeared in a Yellow Flash video earlier today with a hashtag on a tweet by Comic Book Palace.
Oh, okay. Well, I was in the chat thread of that, so that was no big deal there.
Comic Book Palace is that guy that was. We've got the video on Twitter that's blown up where he's complaining about the modern comics industry. Is that one?
Yes, that's the one.
Okay.
And Alan, I don't know how much in the comics industry you get into, or if you just stay in the sci-fi world and say leave those geeks alone. But it's
Well,
there's controversy all the time.
there is controversy. I'll tell you what. Why don't we do this? Let me. I've got a ping here. Why don't we do this? We'll take a break. When we come back, Alan, I want to ask you about that. I will set it up and give you some context, but I want to ask you because it's a writer question that I think you're qualified to answer. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a very quick break, and be back with more conversation with Alan Dean Foster right after this. Don't go.
It's a real pleasure for me as a longtime fan to be sitting here with Aaron Gray. Here with Larry Hama.
We're talking with Kevin J. Anderson, best-selling author.
Mr. Neil Adams.
I am here with David Prince. Axel Alonso, editor.
Shadow Stevens. And Dallas Comic-Con with John Delancey.
Tom King.
Kevin Conroy.
Free comic book day.
Denise Crosby.
PopCon Pop Expo.
Here on location at Star Wars
We're
Celebration.
Sci-Fi Expo talking for our second time with Gil Gerard.
Wichita, Kansas at Time Eddie.
Producer David Gerald.
I've got Eric Flint.
Are here at Smallville Comic-Con.
Wizard World St. Louis.
VillageCon in Bentonville, Arkansas.
Michael Lombardi.
We were talking with Alan Dean.
Quincy Allen.
Suzanne Landon.
Founder of Starlog Magazine, Mr. Kerry Oakwood.
Chris Sami.
Len Lee. Dave Schwartz. Mano Interrami. Jason Aaron.
This is Sci-Fi for Me, your portal to the science fiction multiverse.
Critical path logistics, getting it done, getting it there. Critical path logistics, getting it done, getting it there.
All right, we are back with Alan Dean Foster, R.J. Carter there from Critical Blast, and here's my question. All right, so there's a video, Alan, going around on Twitter. The owner of a comic book store, I believe it's called. I think it's in Massachusetts,
Alice?
and he is complaining about the big two, Marvel and DC. He's basically saying, I can't sell any of this stuff because all they're putting out is crap, because all these writers want to do self-inserts. They want to make themselves the heroes of the stories, and I can't sell any of it. And we've talked about, in the past on our channel here, and a number of different YouTube channels have talked about how modern storytelling in some places has been supplanted by message fiction instead of just telling a good story. So as a writer, let's put on the mentor cap here for a second. Alan Dean Foster would tell a new writer, how do you distinguish between, because I've seen a lot of, write what you know, and you know your own life and all that. Write what you know. How do you distinguish that from self-insert, putting yourself as the protagonist in the book? I mean, Alan Dean Foster is not going to write Alan Dean Foster as Superman. Alan Dean Foster is going to write Superman.
I've never done that in my entire career. I never understood why somebody would want to do that. It's like seeing a painter who's asked to paint a portrait of somebody, and the portrait ends up looking more like the painter than the person they're commissioned to paint a picture of. I've never done that. Of course, when you write science fiction fantasy, it's somewhat easier not to do that You have, I don't know how to tell you, just, I'm not interested in me in print. I'm interested in the people I'd like to meet. I'm interested in the aliens I would like. One question I get asked from time to time is, of all your characters, which one do you think you are most like? Which is kind of close to what you're talking about. And in the Commonwealth stories, there's an alien from a species called the Thranks named Truzin who is basically an 8-limbed, oversized insectoid. But he's very logical and very rational and likes, a moderate sort of creature. And I say, well, that's who I identify with the most. And if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't read science fiction, they immediately get glassy-eyed because it's like, well, this person is very strange. And I say, well, maybe I am a little strange. I don't know. I would much rather hang out with the aliens than hang out with the humans. And already they're edging their way out of the room at this point if they don't read science fiction.
Right.
But I tell writers the last thing you want to do is put yourself in the story because it becomes obvious. And then the worst thing is the characters all start to sound like you. So you have to be much more careful with the dialogue than even with the character description. And then all the characters start to sound alike. And that can be very difficult if you're focusing on plot, on action. And you tend to forget in the dialogue, characters should sound like individual characters. They shouldn't sound like you. They shouldn't all sound like they come from Topeka. It's something you have to work on. So I agree with you. You don't want to write yourself into the story. If you want to do that, write an autobiography.
And the thing is, the publishers seem to be almost encouraging this now. Christopher Priest is quoted as saying when Marvel wanted him to write Black Panther, he said, I don't want to write Black Panther. I want to write this other character. He's like, they're not hiring writers. They're casting writers.
Yeah.
So, if you want somebody to write the black character, you get a black person. You want someone to write the Asian person, you get an Asian character. And it seems like, that's almost what a lot of comics, it's not almost, it's what a lot of comics are now. However the character is that's being written, you're looking at the author almost not from just writing themselves into it, but you can almost see them. I'm Not Starfire. Perfect example of the main character of the story looking exactly like the author.
Well, it's not just happening in comic books. The new Spider-Man video game, Mary Jane Watson, the character that's rendered in the game, doesn't look like the actress who did the motion capture. Instead, Mary Jane is rendered out to look like the girl that wrote the game, or one of the people that wrote the game. And we're starting to see a lot of this where, why is this story crap? And then we see who's writing it, and who's writing it looks exactly like whatever this character is, and we go, oh, okay. Well, I don't understand this trend in modern storytelling. How do we get out of this cycle, do you think, Alan?
Well, a good way to do I'm not in the comic book publishing business, but I don't understand that at all. That makes no sense to me. And it's not just science fiction and fantasy. If you look at the Three Musketeers, for example, I don't know that Alexander Dumas knew 4 guys who looked like the 4 guys he describes in that story.
Right.
He may have, we'll never know about it, but he didn't put himself in it. None of the Musketeers look like, or as far as based on what I've read, act like Alexander Dumas.
Right.
And so they stand on their own as individual characters. This is what people want, I think. I don't if that's a trend, and I don't follow comics closely enough to be involved deeply or knowledgeably in this discussion. But from my point of view, that's the last thing I want.
Yeah.
If I read a comic and Batman's cousin is in it, I don't want Batman's cousin to look or act anything like the person writing the story. I want him to have his own backstory or her own backstory or the dog's own backstory.
That's where you get Cousin Oliver, right?
Yes.
I
Ruins the whole show. Well, I think the only person that I think who has successfully managed to do the self-insert stuff was Ian Fleming. Maybe
Okay.
a bit. but that's the exception that proves the rule, I think.
But back in those days, nobody could go on the internet and look up Ian Fleming.
True.
So nobody had any idea of what Ian Fleming looked like, what his backstory was, or any. He was just, if he put himself into a character, nobody had, except maybe his close friends, had any idea that that was Ian Fleming. Any more than if Alexander Dumas had put himself in a Three Musketeers story, very few people would have known that that was based on the writer. So nowadays, though, it's completely different because everybody has access to everything instantly. And if a character shows up in a Marvel film who looks like the writer or acts like the writer, people can find that out instantly, not even if they don't recognize that character, but it will be all over X or the internet or YouTube within 24 hours. You can't
with
find
photo comparisons side by side. T. Franklin, everything she writes. T. Franklin is a BIPOC, which whatever all the letters stand for, and she's a black lesbian disabled character, and in her books there will always be a black lesbian disabled character, and frequently it's the love interest of the female star of the book for whatever reason during that time. But Jason, to your point, I think the best self-insert in science fiction that worked for me was Kurt Vonnegut in Breakfast of Champions, when he literally inserted himself into the story to paint himself out of the corner.
So, Alan, I think what I hear you say is that the internet has ruined everything.
It hasn't ruined everything. I think the internet has made it better because you can't get away with stuff anymore. In the old days, you could do stuff like that. If you want to talk about Ian Fleming, nobody would know it was Ian Fleming because he would sit there grinning at his typewriter, knowing what he was doing, and a very few people who knew him closely would know what he was doing, but nobody else would know. If you try to do that now, everybody would say, oh, well, that's George Martin. He put himself in the picture there. Or in The Lord of the Rings, that's Peter Jackson on the pirate ship scene that was cut, except in the extended edition. Everybody knows everything now. You can't fool people, so you have to work harder. So I think it makes it better, not worse, for that reason.
Although I did like when Alfred Hitchcock would do it. I mean, he was in all of his own films.
I was going to mention Hitchcock, but
they were Easter eggs.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was an Easter egg. Alfred looked kind of like an Easter egg. Sorry, cheap joke. But people started looking for that. Yeah. Just like they started looking for, if you know the great caricaturist Al Hirschfeld.
Yes.
Yes.
He would always put his daughter's name in every drawing. And it became a thing where people had to look for his daughter's name, how he worked it into the caricature.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
My hunt was always looking for where they hid the little bunny rabbit head on the Playboy covers, but, different strokes.
Yes. But that became, I forget the daughter's name, I'm sorry, Hirschfeld fans. But that became a thing too, and it became known. Otherwise, nobody would have done it. So pre-internet, but still something that people started looking for.
Yeah. Well,
I think, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead and finish your point. I was looking at something here.
No, I just think it's better because it makes you work harder. You can't cheat as a writer. You can't get away with putting yourself in a book without somebody recognizing it. You can't get away with putting a caricature of somebody who has any recognition whatsoever in a book. If you want to put in a brief mention of a character who looks like Tom Cruise in a book, people will recognize that, and suddenly everybody will know about it.
Yeah.
So, what did you think of this Tom Cruise mention in so-and-so's novel? So you have to work harder to prevent stuff like that. I don't believe in doing stuff like that unless you indicate beforehand that you're going to do it. And say, all right, by the way, there's a mention of Tom Cruise in here. But to try and get away with it, you can't get away with stuff anymore.
Yeah. Well, see, I do it intentionally whenever I write because I've been privileged to write some of the Destroyer novels for the Warren Murphy Company. So there's always satire and parodies of characters in there. Like he's not called Ted Kennedy, but we all know who the drunken Irish senator from Massachusetts is.
Well, if you do it intentionally, that's one thing.
Yeah.
And you want people to pick up on it. But to try and sneak it in there, particularly if it's you, if it's the author, and not be upfront about it with the reader. I think that's wrong. I don't think it works. And if that's what's happening in comic books, I think that's a bad trend. I don't see the point of it.
So,
Obviously,
have there ever been discussions about? Has anybody ever tried to get you to write comic books? I don't know that I've
Just what I was
seen
gonna ask.
your name on a comic.
I am in 2 comic books. The first one was many years ago. There was a short-lived but beautifully drawn comic called Andromeda, which came out sequentially. You know, it wasn't monthly or weekly. They'd do an issue, and then when they were ready, they'd do another issue. And they did one issue that was 4 of my stories. It was all my stories. And I was very pleased with the visual interpretations. Probably a hard item to find. Comic people could certainly find it, but the series was called Andromeda. It was, as far as I know, all science fiction. The other one was Charles Barkley and the Referee Murders. I'll give you a minute to pick your jaw up off the floor now.
Okay. All right.
Bruce Hamilton, who ran another Rainbow Comics, which was devoted basically to doing the works of Carl Barks and reprinting those and the Barks lithographs, by peculiar coincidence, was based in Prescott, my hometown. So I knew of it. I had met Carl a couple of times. Carl in his 90s used to drive down from his home in Oregon to sign those lithographs. I don't mean it was in the 90s. I mean, Carl was in his 90s.
Yeah.
He drove down all by himself, all the way from Oregon to Arizona to sign those. Wonderful guy. And so I knew Bruce, and Bruce knew me, small town. And Bruce calls me up one day and he says, "Do you like basketball?" I said, "It's my favorite sport." He said, "Do you know who Charles Barkley is?" And this was long before ESPN and all that. And I said, "Sure." Barkley was playing for the Suns at that time. He said, "I've got the rights. We're going to do an original graphic novel with Charles Barkley as the central character. The title is Charles Barkley and the Referee Murders, and that's all I have."
No.
So I said, "Would you be interested in writing it?" And I said, after we talked money a little bit, I said, "Sure, sounds like a lot of fun." So there is a graphic novel out there called Charles Barkley and the Referee Murders, which sold pretty well, actually, although I'm sure most copies were sold in Arizona because Barkley was playing for the Phoenix Suns. A full color. I think the artist was Joe Adams. So it's very well done. And it's basically a mystery story where Barkley, as a basketball, gets involved in the deaths of several referees. And I wrote this story that involves drugs and graft and cheating on games. And Barkley is the main character. And I think I can safely say that I am the only white guy on planet Earth who has put words in Charles Barkley's mouth. In fact, maybe the only guy, period. One funny thing about it, there's a line in there where Barkley, who's investigating these murders, gets picked up by a couple of cops, and the cops aren't sure about him. And Barkley, as the character in the graphic novel, says, "Well, of course you guys think we all look alike." And I have caught some flack over that over the years, and I have to explain to people, I didn't write that dialogue. Barkley put that in here himself. So I'm very pleased with the result. The only thing I'm disappointed in, I never got to meet Charles Barkley. So if you're listening to this podcast, Chuck, there's a guy up in Prescott who loves basketball, who wrote a lot of dialogue that you spoke, even if it was only in comic book form. And he had there it is. He had final approval, of course. Apparently he was very happy with it. I believe he only agreed to do it if all or a certain amount of the money went to charity. So it's not like anybody made millions of dollars off of this, but it's a really nice looking graphic novel. If you like Barkley, if you like basketball, if you like mysteries, it's not science fiction, it's a mystery.
I like the fact that it was a serious treatment and not, some sort of a goofball kind of thing like the Harlem Globetrotters meet the whatever, or, the Mike Tyson mysteries, which were
that's serious stuff. Bruce, I had to, of course, I knew Barkley because he's a somewhat talkative personality, and I'd seen him on TV multiple times. So I had to draw upon what I'd seen, since I never met him, to create the personality for him as himself. in the story. The other thing that Bruce Hamilton had was he'd obviously seen Dick Tracy, the movie with Warren Beatty, and that's where he got the yellow overcoat from.
I got you. Okay.
So they did
Well-
a photo session, got a bunch of shots of Barkley in the overcoat, and that's where the cover you just showed came from.
And it appears that it's still available over on Amazon. Madness Comic Network posting it there in RJ's chat. It looks like it's still out there for sale. So maybe you'll get some residuals on this.
Hey, I haven't seen residuals on that in decades. I need to talk to my agents about that. Thanks for pointing that out.
Sure. I
I just had somebody asking when Andromeda came out, and I was answering them saying, yeah, it was like 77 to 79. I don't know what year your issue came out, but
Way back then, there was only one printing of those comics. People can find stuff like that, I guess, at comic stores or ask a comics dealer or go to abebooks.com. But there were four of my previously printed short stories that were adapted into comic form. That's it. Now, what I'd really like to do is write a Black Sad story, but those guys don't need me. So they don't need anybody.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, not to sound like that guy, but you're Alan Dean Foster. I would imagine that if Alan Dean Foster decides he wants to write a story in a particular universe, it's worth a conversation.
It's somebody else's universe. You just said it. When I do a novelization, and I talk about this in the book, The Director Should Have Shot You, which is a book I finally wrote because people kept asking me these questions about novelizations. And I thought, hey, I probably ought to get this down in print somewhere. Not only so that people can read about it, but I don't get asked the same questions quite as often. But when I do a novelization, I realize the first thing I know is I'm working in somebody else's universe. I try to be as respectful as possible, even if the film I'm working on was terrible, which has happened. It's not my characters, it's not my universe. And even if I think something should be changed, I try not to change things. I might elaborate on something. I might try to explain something, particularly the science, for example, in more detail. But I cannot go in there and radically change something. It's not my universe. So if I were to offer to do that for something like Black Sad, for example, I don't see why it would be necessary for me to do it. But you never know. Strange things happen. And as I said, I've done script doctoring work now, and you never know what people are going to ask you to do. I have one problem. I'm very straightforward. I am tactful, I think, and diplomatic. But if I think something is a piece of crap, I will point it out in the most tactful and diplomatic way possible, so that hopefully the other people will change it. Usually with films, this never happens.
Right.
So when you're adapting a screenplay for a film, and it's bad, you can tell that it's bad.
Yes,
and
right away.
I'm turning into a Jackson Pollock painting here. It appears like, but if you don't change anything, how do you make it a better script? And my basis for this is that two of the worst movies I think I've seen in comic book fandom is Return of the Swamp Thing and Batman Forever. Conversely, those are two of the best adaptation novels I've ever read from Peter David, because they were just so much better than the film because things were different. What's the fine line that you don't cross to accomplish that?
Well, two things. First, Peter's a pro, and I'm not surprised that you said what you just said. Second thing is my wife does a great Jackson Pollock. You cannot tell the difference between hers and his, except the signature. But to answer your question, for example, with the science, in Alien Covenant, for example, I don't know if you've seen the film, but there's a scene where our humans land on an alien world and immediately take their helmets off. Now, this is not the first science fiction film where this has happened.
Yeah.
You even have science fiction films where there's no faceplate, believe it or not.
Yes, we see them on George's channel a lot.
Okay, well, in this case, they take their helmets off. So the way I fix that without changing that scene or that sequence is to go back on the ship and I write an original scene or sequence where they discuss the probes they have sent down to this world to check things like, is the atmosphere breathable? Is the weather tolerable? What's the gravity? Things like that. So I haven't changed anything that's actually in the film. I've simply added to it.
Now I remember. Oh, okay. So this is gonna hurt a little bit. Back in 2015, the first time that I interviewed you at Worldcon, we were talking about this actual thing, and your novelizations. And I believe there were a couple of different ones that came up. The Alien book being one of them, but also The Force Awakens as one of these fill in the blank type of challenges as well. Does this happen more frequently than it should?
Oh, sure. It's like when I was doing, to speak about a bad film, when I was doing the book version of The Black Hole.
Right.
I think I probably might have told you this at Worldcon, that I sent my contact at Disney a list of 70 things that I thought could have been done cheaply in post-production to improve the film without changing the film, basically. And nobody did anything about it, which I expected because I'm used to that. All I have to do, what I probably should not have done was said, if you don't want to listen to me, go over to Burbank High School and talk to the senior physics class. Well, I guess I did get a little snarky there where I probably shouldn't have, but they wouldn't have listened to me anyway. But you'll see on a lot of films, you'll say science consultant. That's just there so they can say, hey, we have a science consultant.
Right, for coverage.
They don't actually consult the guy or the gal. Yeah, for coverage, exactly. And there's no reason for it. That's what drives me nuts. That's what drives fans in general nuts, is when you see people in space wearing space helmets without faceplates, or when you see, well,
I like
when
the
you
spacesuits
see-
that are form-fitting like Barbarella.
Barbarella was a good film. Hey, I used
I
to
know.
live a few blocks from Jane Fonda and her first husband in Santa Monica, but I never had the guts to go up to the door, knock on the door, and say, "Hey, I like your films. I really like Barbarella." She said recently that she thought Barbarella was a good film. When you age, you come around a little bit to these sorts of things.
I suppose.
Uh,
We do have a. Okay, apparently my sound has not been on all this time. Okay. All right.
Yes, we've heard you.
Okay, so that's
As far as I can remember, that was in the version of the script that was given to me, was just that it was Emperor Palpatine. I didn't make that name up, but I did explore on the part about him being a senator and taking persuading the Senate and all of that. I do remember doing that, but the Emperor was in there and the name was in there because that's not a name. That's just not the way my brain works name-wise. That's not a name I would have come up with.
Yeah.
Can you write the story that fills out the sentence, somehow Palpatine returned?
Somebody tried that. It wasn't very good. Just for a note, apparently when I pulled that chat up is apparently when I hit the button and cut us off. So people did hear all of the stuff about Barbarella. So we're good. All right. I just want to reassure everyone. We haven't sat there for 30 minutes without sound. I was like, wait a minute. Although I have done longer than 30 seconds without sound before, I will admit.
Yes,
but
you
not
have.
tonight. Anyway.
As have I.
So, Alan, is there anything, you talk about, people not listening to you. Are there things in story world, the writing world, that you sit there and you find yourself pontificating and if they'd only listen to me and do X? Have you thought, When are you going to do a YouTube channel and basically spout off about everything that these new kids do wrong as writers?
I don't have time. I'm not sufficiently splenetic. And if people want to ask me personally, I'm happy to tell them. But I'm not the guy who I'm not Andrew Rooney, the guy who used to be on the end of 60 Minutes
Oh yeah.
and made a career out of doing that. But I will mention from time to time on the Facebook page how I feel about something. I'd much rather give people something to enjoy rather than irritate them, because there are enough irritations out there.
Yeah.
So I don't see the need to do a channel. But if somebody wants to ask me a specific question, I'm always happy to answer it, and they'll get a straightforward answer.
All right, and the page on Facebook, Alan Dean Foster fan page, is the official one that you're looking for. If I did a search earlier, and there are a couple of other Alan Dean Foster listings, but this, if I've got this right, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is the one that people should be looking for here, right?
No, that's the correct one.
Okay.
I do have a regular web page, but it's kind of ancient. It has a lot of historical information, bibliography, biography, stuff like that. But for current stuff, I use the Facebook fan page because, for one, there's the Facebook page. The main reason being it's much easier to post video
Sure.
and pictures.
Well,
It's
and
essentially
your AlanDeanFoster.com latest update, April 17th, 2022. So at least it's post-pandemic when you updated it last.
it's really hard to do because the page is built with very old software. And I've looked into having the whole thing updated, modernized. And what I was told was there's so much information on it that to do a proper updating of the whole page would cost 5 figures.
Ouch.
And there's a lot of information tucked on that page, maps of the Commonwealth, things like that.
Yeah.
And so I just said, you know what, let it sit there. People want to know about a book or a story or something, they can go there. Meanwhile, the Facebook page, whatever you think of Mark Zuckerberg, is so easy to do. And I've been posting clips from my travels over the decades. People can see certain things that influenced me and influenced my writing. They'll actually maybe recognize specific things. And it's very easy to do a clip with Apple Video and post it on the page. It doesn't take a lot of time. So for various reasons, I've been doing most updates and stuff on the Facebook page.
Woody in the chat says you probably have a bunch of high-tech capable fans who would very happily do it for free. Just dissect it and put it all back together.
Well, I don't think it would be all that difficult to set it up using a WordPress template.
I had somebody at WordPress who was going to do that. And they made a few modifications and said that they were going to use enlist the help of students and stuff who work with WordPress, and nothing ever happened. So I kind of shrugged it off and said, fine, I'm used to people promising things and not following through on their promises. That's just the way human beings are built sometimes. It's not a big deal. The material is all still there. It's just not updated. There's no fancy graphics.
No.
And as long as I have the other alternative, everything's good.
You can always link the two back and forth together and use one as an archive site. Yeah.
If somebody wants to take a shot at it now, they're perfectly welcome to do so.
All right.
Jason, are we running out of time?
We're getting close to the end, yeah, because unfortunately I don't have the paid account on Zoom anymore, so it's going to cut us off in a second.
Because there is no more sci-fi for me.
And we've gone for an hour. That's right. We're not back yet. We've gone for an hour. Alan Dean Foster, the website, AlanDeanFoster.com. Of course, the Facebook page, Alan Dean Foster fan page. We'll have links to this in the show notes on all the video channels. And we'll have to do this again because Worlds of If magazine is coming back in February. We just did this really long article that we posted over at sci-fi4me.com, and I wanted to get your take on what appears to be a revival of print media, and we're out of time, so we're definitely going to have to do something else very soon and get you back on here. So maybe Alan Dean Foster Part 2. We'll do that.
My third or fourth story was published in Worlds of If
Really?
way back in the 70s, called The Emo Man.
Very cool. I'll have to ask John Paul if he's actually got the copy that's got that in there. He's got a number of past issues in his library. So, all right, sir. Well, thank you very much for being here tonight, Alan Dean Foster, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that's now number 4 that we've done here on the channel. So we'll go for 5 soon.
You have to do that.
And you can find all of our social medias. There's all of ours, and there's all of RJ's everywhere that you can look for all of those things. And we've got way too many of them. I know. So that's it. Thanks very much.
You got to
for
take
being
them
here
before somebody else
tonight.
does, though.
Yeah, I know. All right, so that's it. We're going to head out. Thanks very much, Alan. I really appreciate you spending the time with us tonight. We'll do it again. Good night, everybody. Good night, RJ.
All right.